Hi, good afternoon. It's Dr. Michael McNeil here. As you can see, I've just been doing yard work and chopping wood, cleaning the house, and I was listening to a series, a philosophy series, tape by Dr. Greg Bunton, History of Philosophy series, and it was really interesting because he was talking about analytic philosophy in the history of philosophy, and he talks about Frege, and I think his the last series which I've done, which I'll stick this on as a postscript, I was talking about Frege and his importance, and when he presents it, he presented it quite formally, quite concisely, which I think some of the ways when I was describing it, I was sort of breezing past some things which if you were trying to understand it for the first time, you just wouldn't get there. I'm sort of like assuming quite a lot of knowledge, and so the way he put it in, I think it's quite helpful for me to sort of try and formalise, because Frege really was what his innovations in logic and his understandings of which gave rise to a distinct philosophy of language, modelled after mathematics, really is the background, particularly to the analytic turn, and other philosophers in the analytical movement have moved away from the centrality of sort of logic, but I really wanted to try and formalise in a bit clearer way Frege's contributions for us to understand how important it was to get away from sort of like the subjectivity of idealism and that sort of like feel that flowed out from Kant, where we had made that with Kant as the turning point of Western philosophy, out from Kant had flowed a subjective route, an intuitive route, and in a sense the analytic turn was an attempt to get back to try and rediscover some sort of objectivity, some sort of contact with the real world. So, and Frege was so significant. So at various points I would stop the series and go write down some notes and then put it back. And so it's amazing what you can do, and when you put your mind to it, you can do your housework and all your stuff and write notes. So and prepare for going away, because I'm away next week sort of for work. So one of the statements he makes is that one of, if you like, Frege's posits, which he works out, a posit is something which it's a bit like in normal language it's like it might be sort of like what you're going to try and prove. You believe this is true, and you are then going to try and work it out. So a posit. Yeah. So that's all a posit is. But it says the logic of our signs, which is basically the way we speak and write, gives us access to the objects of reality, which we encounter directly. So the logic for science, our language and how we write, and contains the objects of reality which we encounter directly. So you can see how that's 100% opposite to the idealists that had flown out, interpret Kant, that say that our minds construct the objects of reality. Can you see the importance of this? The objects of reality are not things that have been constructed in the mind, they're things that we encounter. And his posit is that the logic of our signs, the way we actually speak and talk and when we write, that contains the objects of reality, and we encounter those objects directly. So that's a beautiful distillation, I think, a real clear distillation of what Frege's entire logical program is what he was wanting to prove, and I believe he worked through, and he did establish a lot of what he set out to prove. So he took mathematics as a paradigm of knowledge. Well, what does that mean? Well, a paradigm is sort of like is your governing. It's like a principle that it believes is sort of like applicable in all the other areas. So when you're trying to establish people are trying to establish, after Descartes, people were trying to establish, what do we need to do what do we need to assume in our philosophical system to build a foundation for knowledge? Because that Descartes is considered the beginning of modern philosophy, because he brought that question of how can I be certain? What can I be certain of? How can I reconstruct my knowledge? And so that's why it's such an important question. So he's saying that the paradigm for him was that mathematics is the paradigm of knowledge, and we talked about that. And he was saying that if we look at the logic within mathematics and mathematical science and how maths is done, the perfect language, if you like, mathematics, then that is generally applicable in philosophy. And by constructing a language based on those logical principles, i.e. the perfect language, remember the first phase of analytic philosophy was this perfect language approach. If we can generate this perfect language, we can Russell's posit was if we can generate this perfect language of all the other problems of philosophy, then the solutions will present themselves. We can solve the problems of philosophy as linguistic problems. When we talked about concepts are like Frege believed that concepts when they were like functions, they're equivalent to mathematical functions. And we said that mathematical functions, basic algebra, y equals mx plus c. In order to know what the value of y is, you need a value of x. And, that's so. And arguments have to go into those mathematical functions. The value of y gives you a value of x. And he said that more formally, those objects of the world, real sensible objects, come into concepts, and they generate they give us meaningful sentences. So his great contribution there is that concepts are something real. They're non-sensible, how did he put it here? Non-sensible entities, independent of our thoughts about them. So they're not sensible in the sense they're part of the physical world, but you consider these are nevertheless real entities, and that's such a radical. And they're not something that exists in the mind, but they are nevertheless real. So they're not sensible, they're not generated in the mind, but they exist independently of our thoughts about them. So that's like that's a radical innovation, because we tend to think when we think when we conceptualize something, we instantly think we're thinking about them, and and that's how that's just a normally really used to sort of like the word concept. But where do those concepts actually exist? He's saying that these concepts are mathematical, and like mathematics, that we can use the paradigm of maths to say, well, it's like a function. A concept's like this function where the objects of the world come in, and then we generate, when they come in, we generate something meaningful, we generate a declarative sentence. If you look at, say, like what are the objects of mathematics? Well, the objects of mathematics are basically number. It's a theory of number. And so you think, well, what is a number? And so we tend to think, I write the number 2 on the board. No, you're writing the numeral 2, which represents something about the concept of 2-ness. Do you see the difference there? Because otherwise, when you rub the 2 off the board, you're getting rid of 2-ness out. You're getting rid of 2-ness in the universe. And so, and he wanted to say these weren't like some of the empiricists, like I mentioned J.S. Mill, tried to say that mathematics was just conventional, and they're like inductive generalizations. So just something that happens from our experience, and we generated these rules of maths. And Frege said, no, that's nonsense, because that doesn't account for irrational numbers, what are called irrational numbers in maths, which are things like pi, numbers like pi. And so, and he didn't say it was just like, it's got like formalism as if we're just agreeing that something's so. He's actually saying, because this is conceptual and you actually generate something meaningful, it's not just formal. It's something much more, it's much stronger than just being something formal, just we're agreeing on maths, we're agreeing axiomatically about maths. He said there's something much stronger. So he's giving an actual account of a concept being filled with objects of the world that are generating a completely meaningful declarative sentences. And so we've got here that he said those are like the predicates of a sentence. So, and when you predicate something, you are, if you like, you're describing something. So if you like, say, like the house is red, then the house, which is the subject, redness is being predicated of the house. So the is red is like the predicate. So discovering America is like a predicate, and in order for it to be complete, you have to have the object of reality, which is what when this model becomes so powerful, your object of reality. So, i.e., Columbus discovering America, and the house is red. So the house is the real object that hydrates the concept. So you see how powerful this is, because you're saying that you're giving a universal. It's enabling, say, for there to be universal and for there to be a particular. So it's giving a definition of that probably the oldest problem in philosophy. How do you reconcile universals and particulars? And so you're able, by this model of concept being hydrated by an object that instantiates a particular. So it's a very, very powerful model. That's why his contribution is so radical. And he was saying that yes, the objects, when you saturate like a sentence, saturate a concept, and you create like a declarative sentence, that's what you would call a proper name of our grammar. So we tend to think of proper names like nouns, don't we, in sentence. But he's saying that a proper name, what you actually name as a proper name are those hydrated concepts. And he goes on later to say that we shouldn't admit into our dictionary a proper name unless we can establish a referent. And we made that distinction, didn't we, between sense and referent. And because we looked, say, use the example of Venus, which is the morning star and the evening star. So, and Venus is the referent, if you like. Venus is the, it's a nice formal definition here, so that it's the object picked out by any expression. So it refers to the actual object that's picked out by the expression. So whereas the morning star is referring something much broader, it's the thought it expresses. So when you say the morning star, what you actually really mean is you mean that it's the first it's the last star that you see in the morning before it gets too bright, and it's the first star you see in the evening. So you see it, that's the thought, that's the if you like, what that's actually signifying. That's quite different, or that idea of meaning, or is very different from basing meaning on it saying being the referent. Normal language, we can use phrases such as say the will of the people. That doesn't have any referent. That doesn't pick out or identify any single object, but it still expresses a thought. So you can see there that that you can actually say things in ordinary language, and often we call them idioms. We say things in ordinary language, which are meaningful to us. We might say something like the round square is happier than the rectangular square, and you would, and so each of those items, it's like it's got a meaning, but it doesn't actually, it doesn't signify anything, and it doesn't identify any sort of referent. It's like you can see that you could have these. There can be your signs. If you abuse the logic of your signs, which is what I just did there, he would say you're not naming anything at all, and so you shouldn't allow. That is not a proper name. You shouldn't allow it into your system of signs if you want to signify and to be connected with the real world. So you can see how important it is for his logic. That's why he's saying don't admit anything in. If you want to be exact and you want to generate and to be clear and to be signifying the real world in some way, then don't allow that type of construction into your language. And that's when we talked about the logical positivist picking up on that thought, Wittgenstein picking up on that thought, and this is the background to it. He's saying don't allow anything that you can't establish the referent of, and don't name anything as a proper name. Allow it into your dictionary. If you want your language, if you want your philosophy to reflect the objects of the real world in some way. So I think you can see the enormous power of what he was trying to do there. He was trying to be very, very clear by saying, if you're very, very clear in your language and you understand and you use, if you like, the model of mathematics and move it into philosophy, then you're going to solve these philosophical problems. So that was what the whole of Russell's Russell took that as, if you like, his founding principle, and in many ways the logical positivists did as well, was to try and use the tools of this new logic to solve philosophical problems. Okay, so sorry, it's just a little bit all over the place, but I just wanted to try and be a little bit more formal, come up with those words, come up with those formal definitions, and you can see, right, this is why this was so influential as we went into the 20th century, and why the analytic movement really got off the ground when looking at language is the most important thing. Okay, so God bless, see you next time.